So, welcome back to the McRider Diaries. Today we're looking at the 2025 Honda NC750X manual, Honda's open class do it all motorcycle. Now, this bike has always been about practicality and everyday usability. And for 2025, Honda has given it some small but meaningful updates that help keep it relevant in a very competitive segment. Now, before we get into a deeper look, let's first go through some key numbers. Seat height is 802 millimeters. Wet weight is 216 kilograms. The engine is a 745cc single overhead cam parallel twin. It makes about 58 horsepower at around about 6,750 RPM and 69 Newton meters of torque at 4,750 RPM. The bike has a fuel capacity of 14.1 liters, and here in Singapore, the bike costs $20,100 without COE or insurance. So around about 30,000 on the road, give or take. So these numbers give you a sense of what we are dealing with. A middleweight bike that's approachable for most riders, and a bike with modest but very usable performance. First off, what's new this year? Well, this year the NC750 gets dual 296mm front discs, and this replaces the single 320mm setup. The wheels are also lighter, shaving off about 1.8 kilos of overall weight, and more importantly, unsprung weight. The bike also gets a new 5-inch TFT display, which really helps modernize the cockpit. And there's also slightly updated bodywork and a redesigned LED headlight for an overall fresher look. The fundamentals, however, remain the same. This bike is all about practicality. For example, that 23-liter storage compartment where you'd expect the fuel tank to be. That's just really intelligent designing in action. That space swallows up my helmet with plenty of room to spare. And it'll be good enough to carry quite a bit of groceries as well. Honestly, it's one of the most useful features on any motorcycle. And it's a shame we don't see it on more bikes. In terms of low speed maneuvering, the NC is good, but I wouldn't say it's great. At 216 kilos wet, it's not especially heavy for an open class twin, but it does feel a bit weighty when you're moving it around by foot. It helps that the bike has a low center of gravity, and this keeps things very manageable and prevents the bike from feeling overly top heavy. Of course, where the NC really shines is once you get going. This is one of the most forgiving bikes you can ride in the city. Let me show you an example. Here we're crawling along through a car park in second gear at very low engine speeds, and the bike is just chugging along without complaint, almost resistant to stalling. And I don't even need to constantly manage the clutch. I'm just modulating the throttle, which gives you an idea how incredibly easy and confidence-inspiring this bike feels in stop-and-go traffic. And it's not just about stalling resistance. The NC is forgiving in the way it delivers power. Now, on a lot of bikes, being in the wrong gear either means no drive at all or way too much. On the NC, the engine always gives you appropriate and sufficient power for the situation. It doesn't punish you for not being in the perfect gear. It's just easygoing and forgiving that way. The fueling on the bike is also excellent, and the engine is under stress. You can sit at 60 km in top gear or crawl along a jogging space in second. The engine will easily cope with either. And for the city, this is about as close as you can get to a stress-free motorcycle. Having said that, Honda hasn't forgotten about rider aids. You do get three preset riding modes: standard, sport, and rain. There's also a user mode where you can customize the different riding parameters to suit your needs. However, this bike doesn't get cruise control or an adjustable screen. Maybe that's something we'll see at the next model. But still, the bike scores very highly for practicality. That 23-litre boot space is pure genius. And with fuel economy around 28 kilometers per litre, you're looking at about 400 kilometers from that 14-litre tank. So realistically, maybe 260 to 280 before the fuel light comes on in normal riding. And for a 750cc bike, that's brilliant. The bike isn't just easy to manage, it's also comfortable. The low seat height makes it accessible to many riders. And heat management is excellent. You don't really feel any heat in and around town. So long commutes are a strength of this bike. Which brings us to performance. With 58 horsepower, the NC750 sits at the lower end of the spectrum for a 750 twin. So to put that in perspective, if you look at Honda's other 750, the Honda 750, that bike, with essentially the same engine capacity, makes over 90 horsepower. So 58 horsepower versus 90. So the Honda has 50% more power than the NC. The difference though is in character. The Honda's performance comes higher up the rev range, while the NC is tuned for low down torque and a smoother delivery. It's not as exciting, but the power is a lot more usable and available. You can easily go touring on this bike as well, as long as you keep speeds manageable and don't expect to keep up with super bikes. That really sums up the NC750X. It doesn't set your pulse racing, but it gets everything mostly right. Fuel economy, practicality, ease of use. It's the bike you love for what it does, not necessarily how it makes you feel. So if motorcycling for you is about identity and expression and thrills, this bike might feel a little too sensible. You're definitely not going to impress anyone on an NC750X. But if what you want is the most useful motorcycle on the planet, something that does it all effortlessly, this is probably it. This bike is practical to a fault. It won't make your heart tingle, but it will make your life easier. And that's a kind of brilliance in itself. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you again in the next video.